The Bible says, guard your heart with all diligence. Why? Because our hearts are wily. He says in that verse, out of it are the issues of life. Everything that comes out of you comes from your heart. Let me just show you how wily the heart of Zophar was and how wily our hearts can be. In Job chapter 20, Zophar has an amazing response to Job's response. He says, you make me anxious. And then he says, listen, I'm going to be very honest with you. I'm uncomfortable with what you said. So let me just be really transparent with you. And I think that honesty and transparency is sometimes mistaken for discernment. We think, well, if a person's transparent and they're honest, they must be discerning. And that's not at all the case. We also think if a person is well-spoken, they must be discerning and on target. Zophar is not. In fact, Zophar in this chapter 20 is going to use extremely beautiful and figurative language, Hebrew parallelism, strophic structure, and demonstrate a mastery of literature. In fact, what's written here is an amazing work of art. But when you cut through it all, here's what he says. Job, you're a hypocrite. Plain and simple. He says, I don't necessarily believe in what you just said about this resurrection thing. In fact, he in a very poetic language, he says, the hypocrite will perish with his poop. Okay? Just like his poop gets thrown away, so is the hypocrite. You're not going to rise again. This whole thing about I'm going to see my Redeemer and I'll see him face to face after my flesh is, eaten up and everything. I'll come back to life, have this new body. I don't really believe that. But he says it in poetic form. He says, look, the truth is, sin is sweet for a season, but then it sours. Well, that's true. He is in the middle of all this. He has some really true statements. They're just misapplied because, and I'll show you why in a minute, why he misapplies them. The problem was he judges Job. He says, you are self-sufficient and that's why you're in this distress. Don't miss what he's saying here. You're self-sufficient. You had a lot of stuff, and so you turned your back on God. Just admit it. Now, in the middle of this, he'll say something that is super biting because Job in chapter 6 and chapter 7 says, I feel like I'm getting hit with the arrows of God. He's going to use Job's words against him and say, God has a bow of brass and he's shooting arrows at you. Have you ever had your words used against you, something you shared with a friend? Well, I'll tell you something. Don't fear sharing your thoughts and your feelings with friends. True friends won't do that. This is not a true friend. But I'll show you why Zophar does it. He says, the increase of his house will depart and his goods will flow away. In all the tragedy that Job suffers, he focuses on one thing. You were rich and now you're not. Maybe he was jealous. Maybe Zophar was finally saying, hey, look, you had all this stuff, more than me, more than the other friends, and now look at you. You obviously were trusting in those things, and that's why God's taken it all away. Truth was, he wasn't trusting in those things. But Zophar's heart was jealous. Our hearts are so wily, and we've got to examine them. Do you ever secretly like it when a friend has something happen to them that is bad? Is there any part of you that says, well, I've been telling them, that kind of shows them what I've been telling them and I'm justified, or maybe they have something that you want. Guard your heart. And don't think that because you're honest or transparent that you're right. And don't think that because you can say something in such a wonderful way that, wow, did you hear that? How that came off my lips? I must be right. You can be dead wrong. Zophar was dead wrong and poetic at the same time. Guard your heart with all diligence. Guard the words that come out of your mouth. We can't judge and we can never take pleasure in another person's misfortune. Instead, Zophar would have been a good friend if he had reached out and said, you know what? I love you. I'm with you. I'm going to just shut up for a while. Be a good friend today. Guard your heart.